Welcome back to Witch Hunt Podcast. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. We have a special treat for you this week. Not one, but two new episodes dropping simultaneously.
That's right. Today marks the return of Professor Richard Raiswell of the University of Prince Edward Island, who previously joined us for our fascinating Speak of the Devil episode. He's an expert in medieval lore, bringing years of scholarly research to our discussion, including his work on the new book, The Rutledge History of the Devil in the Western Tradition.
That's a good-looking book.
It is. Don't you love this nice picture here?
I do. For those of you who might have missed it, Speaking of the Devil was the episode where we explored Satan as one of history's most enduring and complex figures throughout medieval thought.
In today's two-part special, Professor Raiswell takes us deeper into the dark intersection where demonology meets witch persecution.
What was the critical relationship that developed between demons and witchcraft, specifically in the 15th century? A connection that would become the driving force behind the witch hunts.
If you enjoyed our previous exploration of devil lore, these episodes are essential continued listening.
Professor Raiswell helps us understand how theological concepts about Satan evolved into specific accusations and persecution mechanisms that devastated real communities.
Both part 1 and part 2 are available right now wherever you get your podcasts.
So settle in for a fascinating and chilling exploration of demonic beliefs times 2. Welcome back to Witch Hunt Podcast, Dr. Raiswell. Can you refresh our listeners with a little background on your expertise and work and tell us what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, thanks very much for having me back and to talk more about the devil. Obviously, it's one of my favorite things. But to talk today about the relationship that develops, in particular in the 15th century, between demonism and witchcraft, the kind of witchcraft that animate the witch hunts that are the focus of this podcast. I'm Richard Raiswell. I'm Professor of History at the University of Prince Edward Island in Eastern Canada. I published lots of stuff on aspects of the history of the devil, in particular in the Middle Ages and in the early modern period. Amongst the highlights are a collection of translations, which I did with a colleague, David Winter, from Brandon University in Canada, called The Medieval Devil, a Reader. And I've also got coming out a big 600-page Routledge History of the Devil, which is coming out in May. And that's with David Winter again and Michelle Brock from Washington Lee University in the US.
So what's the connection between the devil and witches?
Yeah, this is a really important and interesting question. I think it goes back to early Christianity and the process by which Christianity comes to define itself. Because one of the problems Christianity finds itself in the early days is it's in a marketplace of supernatural wonder workers. There are lots of people in the ancient world who offer some sort of supernatural remedy for things. All sorts of people offering, cure-alls. They're offering love magic. They're offering all sorts of things. Some of the things that you talked about when you talked to Tabitha Stanmore about service magic. The ancient world is full of these sorts of people. And of course, when Jesus shows up, his principal activity is wonder working. He's performing miracles all over the place. He's healing people. He's casting out demons. He brings the dead back to life. So Christianity finds itself in this sort of strange space where it's got to sort of define itself against this magical tradition. So what is it we do which is different from some of these other people? In fact, some of the early Christian critics actually think that Christianity is just another form of magic. I mean, the classic example of that comes from the book of Acts, where you've got the figure of Simon Magus, Simon the magician, who approaches the apostles and asks to buy the secrets of the magic that they're producing. Of course, the biblical story is that, no, this is not on. It doesn't work that way. But Simon's point, if you think about it from Simon's perspective, hey, these Christians are doing some very powerful magic. How do I do the same sort of thing? well, I will behave just like they did elsewhere, and I will purchase these secrets. So Christians need quite early on to differentiate themselves from magic. For them, their wonder working isn't something that you buy in the marketplace. It's proof of Christ's divinity, and it's proof of the power of their God. The problem is, Christians can't just say, this other stuff is rubbish. These people like Simon Magus are frauds. That's just not on. They can't say that because of a strange story, one of several, but this is the classic one, in the book of Exodus, Exodus 7 and 8, which describes what can only really be characterized as a wonder-working contest between Moses and his brother on one side and Pharaoh and his magicians on the other. I mean, the story goes on for a bit, but the key elements of that Pharaoh's magicians turn the staffs that they're holding into snakes. And in response to that, Moses and his brother do the same thing, exactly the same thing. I mean, in the story, the snakes that Moses and his brother conjure up go around and eat the ones Pharaoh's magicians have conjured up. And that's meant to signify that the magic of Moses is more powerful than the magic of Pharaoh. But what the story makes clear is that this magic works, right? Nobody's saying that this is a fraud, that Pharaoh's magicians have somehow sort of done some sleight of hand trick and pulled some snakes out and managed to hide their staffs. No, it actually happened. It actually worked. Something was going on there. So when early Christians turn to this story, they've got to sort of account for it. And what the argument comes to be is that Pharaoh's magicians, what they did was they conjured up demons. And as we talked about last time round when we were chatting, demons are natural creatures, but they've got certain powers which are beyond people. One of them is that they can move incredibly quickly. So the argument is that when Pharaoh's magicians did whatever hocus pocus they were doing, demons showed up, grabbed their staffs, split it off to, I don't know, the Sahara Desert or something, found some snakes, brought them back, and put them in the hands of Pharaoh's magicians. Perfectly natural process, bit strange, but a natural process, which explained how Pharaoh's magicians were able to do it. But what this means is that quite early on in the Christian tradition, there is a deep suspicion of this other wonder working. And they demonize it. They quite literally demonize it. They say it's only possible through commerce at some level with demons. So there's, right from the earliest Christian tradition, because of this need to differentiate themselves from other forms of magic, there is this built-in tension and hostility to this sort of service magic tradition that you've talked about. And the flip side of that is the only safe and legitimate access to supernatural power that people have is through Christian rituals, Christian apparatus, Christian holy men. So Christianity tries to give itself a monopoly on wonder working, and in the process to differentiate themselves from these other traditions. We're not them. Our magic, our wonder working is safe and it's good and it's pure. The other stuff is demonic and dangerous. So don't use that.
And can you tell us about service magic and attempting to manipulate or influencing the natural world?
Yeah. So despite the Christian anxiety that I just described in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, 5th century, the Roman Empire is crumbling in the 4th, 5th century. Secular power is rolling back. And instead, the Germanic tribes begin to take over. And this is a much more illiterate period. Centralized authority just isn't possible the way that it'd been in the 3rd, 2nd centuries before. So what's happening in the secular side is also happening in the ecclesiastical side. It's very difficult for the church to enforce anything. I mean, it can't. I mean, the Pope can sort of say, don't do magic. And who hears that? I mean, there just isn't the infrastructure to move these ideas around very effectively or consistently. As the Germanic tribes replace Roman authority, they bring with them their own sort of forms of service magic. And they combine it with aspects of Christian ritual, Christian traditions. So they still need to heal children, heal the sick. They need to perform love magic. They need to be able to predict the future, whether the crops are going to be any good. All of these sorts of things that you need to do with service magic. But what they also do is they bring aspects of Christian tradition into it. So if you're gathering herbs for a particular potion to heal somebody, maybe do it under the moonlight, for instance, to try and harness the power of the moon or under some favored astrological sign. But while you're mixing it up, why not say some prayers with that as well? It's as if they're trying to bring in every form of supernatural power that they've got access to. So you've got the power of the herbs, you've got the astrological power, but why not bring in some Christian power as well? And then what you're making is going to be a super powerful potion. We get complaints from Christian authorities about this sort of stuff every now and again. There's a fellow in the 9th century called Agobard of Lyon who complains that people in the countryside still believe that they can cause hailstorms or thunderstorms. And we've got a guy in the 11th century writes a law code, guy's name's Burkhard of Worms, and he lists all sorts of popular superstitions that he says, stay away from these are ridiculous. Don't put your kid on top of an oven or on your roof if you're looking to try and cure some sort of illness. As an historian, you look at that and say, really, that's what people are doing? Where does that come from? But it's probably just some sort of tradition, and you don't know if it's just a one-off that he's heard about or if people are doing it all over the place. You've got no context as an historian for that sort of thing. In general, when churchmen run across this sort of stuff, they prescribe just some sort of penance for it. Don't do this sort of stuff. It's not good, but do some penance. No one's tortured, no one's executed. The church's point is simply to make clear that these beliefs are wrong and potentially dangerous. It is possible to get into trouble when using magic if you're explicitly calling on demons to do something. Obviously, that's not all. And there are people who try to use their occult knowledge or rituals to injure and to harm people, because obviously if you can make somebody fall in love with you or two other people fall in love with each other, you can cause them to hate each other as well. It's the old adage, if you know how to unwitch, you also know how to witch, right? If you think of your doctor gives you these magical little pills to cure your illness, but you also know that the doctor knows how to kill you as well, right? You just trust that that's not happening. So the other side of the knowledge is always possible and dangerous, and obviously that's not on. It's an evil deed, or in the language of the time, in Latin, it's maleficium, which literally means an evil deed.
So we have people trying to heal children, trying to get people to fall in love with each other, and even trying to harm their neighbors. But do we have classic witchy features like flying yet?
No. And that's what's so interesting. In the course of all of these condemnations of magical practices that Burkhard of Worms mentions, he includes a copy of a canon from a church council. That's a ruling from a church council. And this is called episcopi. The term in Latin just means bishops. The canons get their name by virtue of the first couple of words in their title. So this one's addressed to bishops. Hey, bishops do this. So it's just known as episcopi. Burckhardt, when he's reproducing this, thinks that episcopacy comes from the 4th century. Modern scholars tend to think that it's probably 9th or 10th century. But there's no reason to think that Burckhardt would have known that. So he's not being deceptive or anything. He's just doing the best he can. Episcopacy says that there are some women who believe that on certain nights they are summoned by the Roman goddess Diana. And they come to her in the spirit and they ride out with the goddess on the backs of beasts. They travel through the air huge distances through the night sky. This sounds like the idea of flying witches, and it seems to be based upon some sort of belief of rural people. We really don't have very much evidence for it, but Burckhardt points this out based upon reproducing a canon from an earlier period. But what Episcopacy says, which is so interesting, is it says that these women, in believing that they fly out with Diana at night, are deceived by the devil. They may think that they are flying through the air, but this is actually an illusion planted in their minds. It doesn't happen. What's more, the canon goes on to say that anybody who believes that this does happen is, in the language of the canon, beyond doubt an infidel. Obviously, this is meant to be a criticism of the women who think that they're engaged in night flight. But the idea of women flying huge distances to worship the devil will become an absolutely central feature of witch belief 500 years down the road. And this is going to be a real problem for authors like those who wrote the Malleus Maleficarum, which we'll be talking about in a little while. Church law says this is impossible. It can't happen. So it painted a fairly tolerant view of magic here in the early Middle Ages. It's practical stuff, and it reflects the needs of people at the time to try and exercise some sort of control over the world in which they live in. That sort of service magic area. But there's a few things that are not permitted. Commerce with demons are not permitted, and the idea of night flying is just not on.
Do we have any people from the early Middle Ages who are described as witches?
Yes. The first account we've got of a female witch who seems to have enlisted the devil to work some sort of magic comes from the early 12th century. It's in a work attributed to an English monk called William of Malmesbury. He dies in 1143. And he describes this story as a portent from hell. The story concerns a woman who lives in the town of Berkeley. In English, it's spelled Berkeley, but in English, it's pronounced Berkeley. William of Malmesbury doesn't date this story, but where he includes it in his chronicle, it comes just after the death of Pope Gregory VI, and he dies in 1048. So it's mid-11th century-ish. He says that he heard this from a reliable source. This is the story. The woman has 2 surviving adult children. One's now a monk, the other one's a nun. She lives alone. There's no mention of a husband, any male relative, or anything like that. She's older. She's probably in her 40s, maybe 50s, that sort of age. And she's clearly a solitary figure. And she has, of all things, a pet raven. We're told in the story that she's accustomed to using demons to work sorcery. But it isn't really clear what she used to do with it. The text just says that she used sorcery to fuel her greed and her lust. But she's very, very poor. She's alone. And obviously, she's not conjuring up piles of wealth or anything like that. You'd think she could do a bit better for herself if she was doing that. But nevertheless, the story goes on. The raven tells her one day that she's about to die. So she calls her kids, the monk and the nun, and she admits to them that she's practiced the demonic arts for much of her life. But she hoped that the piety of her two children would maybe benefit her soul, so she could still be saved, perhaps. And what she tells them is, she says, when I die, sew my body into the skin of a deer, then put that into a stone coffin, seal the coffin with lead, bind it with iron chains. Then she says to the kids, arrange for a chorus of monks to sing psalms and say masses for her for 50 days and nights afterwards. And if demons are not able to take her body away after 3 days, then the kids get to bury it. So the kids do all of this for dear old mum. Monks sing away, and through the first 2 nights, demons try to break in and take her body away, but they can't get past all the chains and the seal and so on. But on the 3rd day, the story goes, a huge demon smashed his way into the church where her body was, called to the woman in the tomb, telling her to get up. The demon breaks the chains and drags the woman off on a black horse covered with iron spikes. And her wretched cries apparently could be heard for 4 miles as they rode away. That's it. That's the story. Well, there's a couple of important features here that we need to think about for what comes down the road. First of all, this woman's a loner. When the witch hunts pick up, they envision a vast, demon-inspired conspiracy of witches. That's not here. That's absolutely not here. There's no suggestion also that she's made a pact with the devil or demon. She just seems to be using illicit magic. But she's also not doing anything to harm anybody else. The only person who's injured by her actions is her. She's not harming anybody else. She's not trying to injure people. She's just done some stupid things and is going to have to pay for it herself.
Yeah.
So it's quite a different story to some of the diagnostic features that we see by the later 15th and into the 16th century. And in fact, it's quite possible that this anecdote is set up as sort of a teaching tool in William's account of it. This is the sort of thing you shouldn't do. By this point, we're just beginning to get preachers wandering around, and they need good stories, right? You can't just waffle on about this, that, and the other thing. Otherwise, you're going to be hit by every piece of rotting vegetables around. You need a good story. This is a good story. This will keep people interested. You tell them a good story and then get into the morality of it, and they'll take that away. So maybe this is just a preaching story. We don't know. That's the story. That's the context. That's all we've got. But there's a couple of other stories similar to this in William of Malmesbury. But these people are not a major problem to anybody except themselves. And so the value of the story is didactic. Don't do this, kids. Stay away from this. It's dangerous.
It's a very fascinating story, but those features that you mentioned raise some questions. If the Witch of Berkeley was solitary, where do we get the idea of a sect of witches who are in league with the devil?
Yeah, and this is absolutely crucial. At about the time that the Witch of Berkeley story is set down, middle of the 12th century, the church is becoming increasingly concerned with heresy. There is a pope in Rome, but the church really hasn't had an effective mechanism for policing belief until really the 12th century. In the 12th century, they begin to get interested in what some ordinary people believe. And in fact, there are various heresies that begin to spring up, particularly in the south of France, that seem to be postulating even the possibility of a rival church. This is the Cathar heresy. The church is becoming increasingly concerned with heresy and is, for the first time, beginning to get the mechanisms to be able to deal with it. The church develops institutions to try and deal with heresy. Firstly, they try to persuade heretics, teach them, okay, this stuff you're teaching is wrong, this is the right stuff. But then they become more concerned about rooting it out. And in the year 1183, the Pope sets up the Inquisition. At this early stage, the Inquisition is really comparatively mild. It requires every bishop, so a bishop oversees a diocese, he's responsible for everything that's happening in the diocese. It requires each bishop to go and visit all of the parishes in his diocese in which heresy has been reported. He has to do that twice a year. He goes into the diocese, he summons some learned men, some men of integrity. He said, do you know of any heretics here? And if any heretics are identified, they're handed over to the secular authorities for punishment. And if there aren't any, he goes home. Every now and again, the Pope might appoint a special inquisitor, an outsider concerned in particular for rooting out heresy in one particular region. And one of the earliest and the most infamous of these special inquisitors is a man named Conrad of Marburg. In 1231, Conrad is charged with rooting out heresy in parts of the Germanic lands. His job is to investigate heresy and then to act as judge and to sentence the accused. And he operates with two converted ex-heretics who claim that they have a special gift for identifying heretics. They said they don't need evidence, they just knew when heretics were there. And for the next 2 years, from 1231 to 1233, they had untold numbers of men and women burned at the stake if they would not admit that they were heretics. The thing is, it seems that when Conrad encountered these heretics, he's understanding them in demonic terms, and this is new. And he reports this to the Pope as if this is a demonic sect. What he describes the Pope is an organized sect of devil worshippers, sort of an anti-church that is set up almost to parody and mock all of the established rites of Christianity. And we've got a very detailed description of what he thinks he's found. He says that when people try to join this sect, they have to go through an initiation rite. First of all, they have to kiss a huge toad. Toads are believed to be poisonous at this time. They have to kiss the toad on the mouth, and they have to consummate the kiss with saliva. Sometimes they have to kiss the rear of the toad. Then after they do this, and this is his language, a pale-skinned, emaciated man with dark eyes appears and approaches the recruit. The two of them kiss. His kissing is actually absolutely fundamental to the way medieval society is structured. Within the feudal system, if somebody pledges to serve somebody else, if a vassal pledges to serve a lord, there's a whole ritual process that is involved in that, but it's consummated with a kiss. So this is an imitation of that. So they have to kiss this pale-skinned, emaciated man, and they have to pledge to serve him. Then there's a great banquet. Then a black cat comes into the room, backwards and with its tail up. And everybody, including the pale man, has to kiss the cat on the anus. And then they receive some sort of blessing from the pale man. Candles are then blown out, and according to the letter that describes Conrad's sect, then begins the filthiest lechery, including homosexual incestual sex and women giving themselves over, it says, to anal sex as well. And then things get strange. The candles are relit, and a shining man appears. He's described as shining brighter than the sun, but only from the waist up. Below the waist, he's hairy like a cat. And the recruit and the shining man exchange tokens. And again, this is sort of imitates the process whereby a vassal agrees to serve a lord. And then the shining man vanishes. And then, after welcoming the new recruit, everybody at this assembly engages in every sort of blasphemy that they can possibly imagine. They've got some consecrated Eucharists at this point, and in Catholic theology, in fact, this is very new Catholic theology, proclaimed in 1215. The Eucharist is actually the real, literal body of Christ. It's not a metaphor, it's not symbolic, it is the real body of Christ. It's transformed from bread into the body of Christ through the Mass. And that doctrine's proclaimed in 1215. So Conrad is only 15, 20 years after that becomes official doctrine. Anyway, at this ceremony, they describe all sorts of outrages that they perpetrate on the consecrated Eucharist. When they receive the Eucharist in church, they keep it in their mouth. They don't swallow it. So they don't actually incorporate the body of Christ into their own body. Instead, they take it back for this ritual and they spit it into the latrine. And then they proclaim that Lucifer was the creator of everything. So what he thinks he's discovered, or what he says he's discovered, actually ticks every blasphemous box that he can possibly imagine. He tells the Pope this, and the Pope writes back a letter saying, you better deal with this, Conrad. And that's how we know what Conrad's complaining about is from the Pope's letter. And the Pope says that back in the good old days, in the book of Exodus, Moses slaughtered 23,000 idolaters in a single day. We need to have a champion like that now. Somebody that ruthless to deal with these sorts of levels of abomination. Obviously, that doesn't happen. Conrad is murdered just a couple of weeks after this letter was sent out. And the people who replace him just quietly let it all disappear. But Conrad's report is important because it contains many of the tropes which will go on to feature in full-fledged witchcraft theory as it develops in the 15th and into the 16th century. It's a secret sect that operates among us. If you read between the lines of Conrad's ideas, these people look like you and me. They go to church. They participate in the sacrament. They just don't swallow it. You don't know that. So this could be your neighbors we're talking about. That's very worrying. And it's an inversion of Christianity as well. It's an inversion of Christian rituals. It's an inversion of social conventions as well. It's this anti-feudalism, this anti-relationship between a lord and a vassal. And it also seems to involve this shining man who's probably meant to be the devil. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says that Satan can transform himself into an angel of light. Well, maybe that's the shining man. I mean, the text does not say that explicitly, but that seems to be a possible interpretation.
Where do things go from there? How do they change in the 15th century?
Yeah, so they begin to change in the 15th century in some quite significant ways. We've got reports from a judge named Peter of Bern. Now, he's not a churchman. He's a secular judge. And Peter is operating in the mountainous region around the city of Bern in modern Switzerland. And this is quite important because much of the early accusations of witchcraft seem to come from the northern side of the Alps, spanning an area from Lyon in the west across to pretty much Innsbruck in modern Austria in the east. So they're coming from places which are more isolated. They're going to be off the mainstream trade routes. These are places people don't visit that much. Anyway, Peter is active in that sort of region. He's not an idiot. He's a judge, so he's been formally trained. He's got a legal education. A problem with Peter of Bern is that he's left us no records. What we know of Peter of Bern actually comes secondhand from a theologian called Johannes Nieder, who writes a book called the Formicarius, which he finishes writing in about 1438. Formicarius means anthill. It's not actually a witch hunting text. It's a text about church reform, but the final bit of it seems to deal with many of these cases that Peter of Bern is suggesting. So we know about Peter through Nieder. And according to Nieder, Peter prosecuted one witch who told him that there were various other witches in the region who had recently killed and eaten 13 infants in the region. She confessed that these witches secretly kill infants when they're lying asleep in bed with their parents. And parents think that they've smothered the child, that they've just rolled over on them. But actually, in actual fact, witches have killed the kid. After that, the witches dig up the bodies of the infants once they've been buried. And then they boil up the corpses until the bones separate from the flesh. They remove the bones and then they create some sort of, I don't know, it's hard to come up with appropriate language for this, but stock, some sort of stock from the flesh and the fat of these infants. And they use this liquid in some of their ceremonies and in their magic. Nieder also says that Peter arrested a husband and wife team of witches at one point, and he separated them. He put them in separate cells. The wife refused to say absolutely anything, but the husband confessed that he'd been a member of a secret sect of witches. And he described the initiation process, whereby he had to do homage to a demon. And after that, this male witch drank some of the boiled baby stock. And when he did, apparently, he knew all of the secrets of witchcraft. It's really difficult to know what to make of this, because elsewhere in Nieder's text, he describes some more mundane style of witches who seem to be just guilty of practicing service magic or that darker side of service magic. If you can find lost items, if you can find lost grain or something like that, you can also probably work up some sort of magic to steal grain. If you can cause fine weather, you can cause bad weather. So he seems to have people who are these sort of witches that he's describing, but also people who are just doing this nastier sort of fairly ordinary magic. People who are not part of a sect. They just do it because they want to, or they've got the power to, or they're trying to enrich themselves in some sort of way. So it's not clear why we've got two sorts of witches described in Peter of Bern. But it's clear that things are beginning to change with Peter of Bern. Peter of Bern is finding people who seem to be confessing to more extreme ideas of witchcraft.
What witchcraft law or policy would have he been convicting them on?
There isn't a witchcraft law. This is assault, technically. The law, secular law, Peter is a secular judge, so he's not working through church courts. But the secular law doesn't make a distinction between me assaulting somebody with a dagger and me assaulting somebody through occult means. It's still assault. Slightly more, well, quite a lot more difficult to prove that I assaulted you through supernatural means rather than assaulting you after drinking too much and in a pub fight.
With this being an era before printing, how do ideas spread from these isolated parts of the foothills of the Alps?
Yeah, this is a really interesting thing because the short answer is we don't know for sure. But what does happen is that between 1431 and 1439, there is a large church council in the city of Basel in modern Switzerland. It's on the north side of the Alps, in that region that we've just been describing, where things are beginning to happen. And Basel is only about 100 kilometers from Bern, so it's about 4 days' ride from the city of Bern. But what's happening is all of the major churchmen of the day are coming to the city of Basel to talk about church reform. And the council has a lot on its plate. But one of the things which absolutely was not on their plate was witchcraft. But what scholars are thinking happened is that during the breaks between the sessions, the churchmen are mingling. If they'd had coffee at this time, during the coffee breaks, they would have been discussing the sorts of things that they're hearing are happening. And we think that these sort of ideas are circulating amongst all of these churchmen. And then, of course, when they go home, they're also thinking about these ideas and maybe looking for them when they start investigating problems in those sessions, when they encounter heretics in their regions. So this embryonic idea of witchcraft seems to have spread as a result of this church council in the region. And we've got a text which comes out of this, which has got a really important early witchcraft document associated with it. The document's called the Errores Gezariorum, translated, doesn't help very much, the errors of the Gezari. We don't know who the Gezari are. When people translate it, people generally translate it as just heretics, the errors of the heretics. We've got 3 different versions of this. We're still in the era of manuscripts, so things are handwritten, so that we always got variants, different versions of text, because they have to be copied out by hand. We've got 3 different versions of them, and they seem to be produced over a 20-year period. But the earliest one seems to date from about 1436. It's not very long, and it's anonymous. But it describes the beginnings of what is going to become the witches' Sabbath, or the witches' Sabbath. It calls it the synagogue of Satan, this early period, which is an allusion to Revelations 2:9. And it looks a lot like what Conrad of Marburg has described. Many of the features are the same. Conrad's stuff is coming probably as a result of interrogations with torture and the threat of torture. And it seems quite likely that this is the source for the Errores Gezariorum. It seems probably to be based upon the interrogations of 2 witches in particular. But again, there's a whole section about the process by which new recruits are brought into this sect, and the text is explicit. They're male and female. Witchcraft becomes more gendered over time, but right now it's male and female. Talks about the need for an oath of loyalty for the recruit. They do homage, this time directly to the devil, who they kiss on the posterior. The devil sometimes also appears in the form of a black cat, sometimes in human form. There's another big banquet where they feast on every sort of strange dish, including roasted and or boiled infants. There's another great dance, which leads into an orgy, and it's an abominable orgy. It says male partners with male, female with female, mother with son, father with daughter, every sort of abomination they can imagine. And then once the candles are lit again, they prepare all sorts of potions and powders using the fat from these children that they've killed and cooked. And they mix this with the poisons of various unclean creatures like spiders, toads, and lizards. And with the devil's help, it says, these potions help them cast spells to kill people or animals, but when rubbed on a stave, they help the novice fly to the synagogue of Satan whenever they're called, whenever they're summoned. So this is the first sort of allusion to the idea of flying witches who can fly. With the Errores Gezariorum, what we're on the verge of is what scholars call the cumulative or elaborated conception of witchcraft. This is the sort of witchcraft which dominates in the later 15th, 16th century. It's very different to the witch of Berkeley. The witch is not a solitary. She's part of a vast, secret, anti-Christian conspiracy that is ultimately led by the devil. It's secret. You can't identify these people in normal life. This relationship with the devil comes in the form of a pact, which is consummated through either this sort of kissing or an increasingly later intercourse with the devil. At certain times of the year, the witches are obliged to travel through the air to the synagogue, or as it's called later, the Sabbath. This is the large assembly of witches presided over by demons and sometimes by Satan himself. And at the Sabbath as well, they share all of their latest malice and all of their sorts of potions and powders and ointments that they use to work evil deeds.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Do you have any concluding remarks about what we've discussed so far, and can you preview what's coming up next?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I think we're on the verge of talking about the great early classic of witch hunting. I say classic, but obviously it's a very important book, but it's obviously a very problematic book. So we're on the cusp here of talking about the Malleus Maleficarum. The Malleus Maleficarum is the first great witch hunting manual. But the thing which is so important about it is when it appears, because it appears just after the coming of printing. As I just discussed, early ideas of witchcraft seem to have circulated through churchmen leaving a church council. So it's individuals who've just sort of learned about these things through discussions. But with printing, what you've got is a book which circulates in hundreds, thousands of copies across all of Europe. And one of the things which we often forget as well is that Latin is the intellectual language for all of Europe. It doesn't matter where you are, France, the Germanic lands, Spain, England. If you've got people who are university educated, they can read this book. So these ideas that have formulated in this area around the Northern Alps spread with the Malleus. And the Malleus is associated with the dissemination of this elaborated conception of witchcraft, which becomes so very important through the period of the high witch hunts in the second half of the 16th and into the 17th century.
Thank you for joining us on this special double feature week of Witch Hunt Podcast.
You just heard part 1, but part 2 of this special conversation with Dr. Raiswell is available right now.
Both part 1 and part 2 are available right now wherever you get your podcasts.
So let's go rejoin Professor Raiswell on part 2.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow. The Salem witch trials resulted in witchcraft accusations against more than 150 people and the executions of 20. So what went wrong? We explore this and other facets of the witch hunt in our new podcast, The Thing About Salem, premiering June 1st.
The Thing About Salem offers bite-sized episodes in both video and audio formats that you can enjoy in 15 minutes or less.
I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack. Our ancestors experienced the Salem witch trials.
And here's a little taste of what you can expect from The Thing About Salem. Possibly Dr. William Griggs decides that the girls, they're not sick in a natural way. They're under an evil hand. Just like that one, Sarah. So what does it mean that they're under an evil hand?
The devil has come to Salem.
The devil's in Salem.
Each week, The Thing About Salem brings you information on a thing from the witch trials.
Episodes will stream on YouTube and all podcast platforms. To get ready, find us at aboutsalem.com.
Be sure to join us for episode 1 on June 1st.